Edgar Cayce on the Book of Revelation. Through Cayce's otherworldly journeys, he learned the true interpretation of the Bible. According to Cayce, the Bible is the symbolic account of the fall and restoration of the human soul to its divine origins. Genesis is the symbolic testimony of humanity's fall from heaven and paradise lost. Revelation is the symbolic testimony of humanity's restoration to heaven and paradise found. The Book of Revelation was written by a man named John, possibly John the Apostle, toward the end of his life. John records a vision he experiences, probably while dreaming or meditating. This vision contains a tremendous amount of symbolism, the same kind of symbolism one would see in a dream, a vision of the spirit world. In fact, the Book of Revelation contains the same symbolism found in the symbols in the prophet Daniel's dream. All biblical dreams, such as those of Joseph, Gideon, Daniel, Paul, and Peter, are very symbolic and therefore had a hidden spiritual meaning rather than a literal interpretation of the symbols. Such is the case with the Book of Revelation. During several of Cayce's journeys into the spirit realms, he was able to unlock the secrets to the symbolism in the Book of Revelation. He gave a large amount of information specifically for the purpose of discovering the book's hidden meaning. Cayce described the true nature between humanity and God. Cayce revealed that humans actually have three different dimensions of human awareness: the conscious mind, personality; the subconscious mind, soul; and the superconscious mind, spirit. An important goal in everyone's life is to awaken our superconscious mind to attain what Cayce called at one met with God. The superconscious mind is called by many names by many religions in many different cultures. Some of these names are Buddha consciousness, Christ consciousness, the collective mind, the universal mind, the collective unconsciousness, the Holy Spirit, Brahman, God, the clear white light, Allah, higher self, the mind of Christ, etc. Cayce's references to the Christ consciousness and the mind of Christ has little to do with the personality known as Jesus. Cayce revealed that Jesus became the Christ, a full manifestation of the Christ consciousness, the perfect union of the human with the divine. It is God's desire for all of humanity to become Christs, or Buddhas if you live in the East. Such a condition will truly bring the kingdom of God to the earth. Cayce revealed that the Book of Revelation is the symbolic story of how humanity in general, and a human in particular, attains this manifestation of the divine. Cayce's symbolic interpretation about the Book of Revelation can be contained in a book all by itself. In fact, a whole book has been written about Cayce's interpretation of Revelation. It is entitled Edgar Cayce's Commentary on the Revelation. There is also a video on this subject from the R Foundation, the Cayce organization. What follows is a very brief summary of the information he received. Chapters 1 to 3, Letters to the Churches. Literal, John, on the island of Patmos, explains that he was in the Spirit when Christ appears to him standing in the midst of 7 candlesticks. Christ then tells John to write down what he sees and hears concerning 7 churches. Interpretation. While in meditation, John's conscious mind becomes open to his subconscious mind and his superconscious mind. The 7 churches and the 7 seals represent the 7 spiritual centers, i.e., chakras, of the body where the physical, mental and spiritual forces all come together. The superconscious mind within John tells him that anyone who can regain control of these spiritual centers within their bodies can access the superconscious mind and never need to reincarnate again. Revelation 3:12. Here is a table of the symbols. Church gland seal. Ephesus gonads 1. Smyrolid 2. Pergamos adrenals 3. Theatera thymus 4. Sardis thyroid 5. Philadelphia pineal 6. Laodicea pituitary 7. Chapter 4-11, Christ opens the seals of the book in H. Literal, John now appears at the throne of God and sees 4 beasts and 24 elders around it. On the throne sits God who has a book with 7 seals. John weeps when he learns that no one can open the seals to the book. One of the elders tells John that Christ is able to open the seals. Christ then opens the seals, resulting in many earth changes. The 7th seal unleashes 7 angels who sound 7 trumpets which are sounded one by one. Interpretation. John has a mental awakening when he attains the spiritual level of the superconscious mind within the throne of his own body. The 4 beasts are his 4 lower spiritual centers, animalistic desires, and the 24 elders are the 24 nerves from his brain leading to his 5 senses. The superconscious mind is now in full control of John's body. The body is symbolized as a book with 7 seals which no one has the ability to open on his own. Revelation 5:3. Only through the development of the superconscious mind within a person can these spiritual centers within the body be opened, i.e., spiritually activated. As each spiritual center within the body is activated, different parts of the body are purified and upheavals of the body occur mentally, physically, and spiritually. The superconscious mind spiritually activates the 7th spiritual center, the pituitary, the master gland of the body. As a result of this, it becomes quiet in heaven for 1/2 hour. Revelation 8:1. This is symbolic of the perfect control of the mind for 1/2 hour through meditation. The following are some of the symbols of revelation interpreted by Cayce. Symbol meaning: Paradise of God, the original consciousness of humanity before its fall into flesh. Tree of life. The spiritual centers of the body, such as the heart and the pituitary, that becomes perfectly synchronized. Angel of the Church, the intelligent force governing a spiritual center within the body. Sata. Self-centeredness, self-gratification, self-indulgence, self-importance, self-righteousness, self-consciousness, self-glorification, self-delusion, self-condemnation, self-ego, the false god, the beast. Book of Life, the collective unconscious record of all souls, memory. Earth, the physical body. New Jerusalem, the superconscious mind awakened. Nakedness, the exposure of faults. 7 lamps, the wisdom of the 7 spiritual centers within the body. Chapter 12-14, a woman, a dragon, 2 beasts, and a lamb. Literal, John sees a woman with 12 stars about to bear a child. Next to the woman is a dragon that is ready to devour the child she is giving birth to. After the child is born, the child is taken to the throne of God. Afterward, a war in heaven occurs and the devil and his angels are cast out of heaven to earth. John also sees a beast rise out of the sea which the world worships. John then sees a lamb on the earth and angels proclaiming the fall of Babylon. Interpretation. John is shown a picture of the soul of humanity in its development since the days of eternity. The Woman symbolizes the soul of humanity crowned with 12 stars, the 12 basic patterns of human personality as described in the zodiac. The child she bears is the conscious mind. As the conscious mind is born, a rival force of the self occurs, which brings about recurring periods of rebellion in humanity. Through divine intervention, the conscious mind is protected while the unconscious mind, from which it sprung, is withdrawn below the conscious level. This is the same story as symbolized as the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Rebellion from the physical brings conflict into the soul, but the soul can remain above it by remaining concealed from the forces of self-will. The beast rising out of the sea is the selfish animalistic desires that arise which are capable of ruling humanity. These desires spring from the self-will of the spiritual intellect of humanity, whom the world worships as a symbol of material success. The human intellect, lacking spiritual orientation, cuts itself off from all that is divine. The lamb that John sees are the forces of the superconscious mind in the world going into action. Below, the human desire for earthly riches and success in the gratification of the flesh, begins to be destroyed as humans are shown the consequences of their prostitution of their higher faculties. Symbol meaning. The number for divinity 7, spirits of God, candlesticks, perfection. The number for man 6, imperfection. The mark of the beast evolved animalistic behavior in humanity. The mark of the lamb evolved divine behavior in humanity. The number of the beast 666. Evolved behavior, symbolized by the number 6, influencing all aspects of a human being, physical, mental and spiritual, which is symbolized by the number 666. Chapter 15 to 18, 7 angels, 7 vials of 7 plagues, and a great prostitute riding a 7-headed beast. Literal, John is shown 7 angels, each of whom holds a vial containing a plague which they pour upon the earth one at a time. John then sees a woman sitting on a 7-headed beast with 10 horns. The woman wears on her forehead the name Mystery, below the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. John is told the 7 heads symbolize the 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and the 10 horns symbolize 10 kings. These make war against the Lamb, and the Lamb conquers. Interpretation. John is seeing within the soul of humanity, the collective unconscious, that the souls of individuals are purified and tested on 7 levels of consciousness symbolized by the 7 plagues being poured out by the 7 angels. When all 7 levels of consciousness have been purified, then, and only then, can a person control the physical, mental, and spiritual forces within his body. Physical diseases arise from the misuse of the forces and self-gratification of the flesh, wars against universal truth. This brings about conflict in the world against groups and governments. The end of the 7 ordeals comes when humanity's social institutions and concepts collapse, leaving universal truth to be realized. The prostitute of Babylon symbolizes humanity's desire, lust for riches and gratification of the flesh. The beast it rides on are man-made ideas stemming from self-gratification. It is explained to John that these forces have taken control of the 7 spiritual centers of the human body, thereby becoming possessed and ruled. However, as the highest forces of evolving humanity overcome the forces of self, even the 10 basic urges of the body, symbolized by the 10 horns, will in time fulfill the divine pattern. As the divine nature in humanity becomes less realized, society is destroyed by its own hand through self-gratification. Symbol meaning. 7 plagues. The purification and tribulation the soul experiences which may overcome the karma of the soul. Vials of the wrath of God. Karma, consequences, reap what you sow, eye for an eye. Armageddon. Spiritual conflict within a person. False prophet. Self-delusion. Chapter 19 to 22, Rejoicing in Heaven, the Devil thrown into a bottomless pit, a new heaven and new earth. Literal, John now sees much rejoicing in heaven and the appearance of Christ. An angel casts the devil into a bottomless pit for 1,000 years. John then sees a new heaven and a new earth come into being. Interpretation. What was the final salvation of the bodily, mental, and spiritual forces described within John, now are shown to take place in collective humanity. When humanity recognizes the divinity within them as the controlling force in the world, and turns away from their own selfish pattern of living for self alone, the old pattern disappears and the Christ pattern emerges. John is told that the merging of the evolved self with the divine superconscious, which has taken place in John, must also take place in all humanity, Revelation 19:7. The fulfilled pattern of evolved humanity, the Christ, i.e., superconscious mind, is now shown in a position of power, the so-called second coming of Christ. Now the archetype of humanity's continual rebellions, the self-willed intellect symbolized as the devil, is confined for a time in the collective unconscious mind. During this period of 1,000 years, the 1,000-year reign of Christ, only the evolved souls will be permitted to incarnate the earth, Revelation 20:4. At the end of this period, the remaining souls begin to incarnate, bringing with them their unsatisfied ambitions and desires. This, of course, brings about the former conditions of imbalance, wars and plagues. These conditions, all man-made, are now themselves eliminated and all mental forms and patterns not formed by divine will are purged. Revelation 20:14. The new heaven and new earth John sees is humanity's perfected state of consciousness and regenerated body. The human mind at this point is now one with the divine in the perfection of control and is free from outside limitations. The human conscious mind merges with the superconscious mind. John states that if anyone adds or takes away from this book, that person will experience the plagues in this book. The book is the body, which is the vehicle for human experience in the world. Through it, the lessons of the soul are learned. There can be no shortcuts or meanderings without dire consequences to the body. Symbol meaning. Marriage of the Lamb, the union of the self with the Christ consciousness. Word of God. The Logos, the Christ consciousness, the fulfilled evolved pattern of humanity. Lake of fire, the subconscious mind's area of repression, the ID. First resurrection, the reincarnation of advanced souls. Gog and Magog, worldly influences. The dead in judgment, reincarnating souls. Hell, remorse, self-condemnation, guilt and frustration. Second death, the destruction of all man-made evolved conditions. 12 tribes of Israel, 12 gates, 12 angels, 12 foundations, 12 disciples. The 12 basic patterns of human personality, the zodiac. Temple of God, the superconscious mind, the Christ consciousness. New Jerusalem, the evolved soul that is one with divinity. The conquering of self is truly greater than were one to conquer many worlds. Edgar Cayce. 4. Cayce's interpretation of the Book of Revelation. The Book of Revelation is a symbolic interpretation of the body and the journey each person must make in order to be reunited with the universal mind. Q. Are we correct in interpreting the 7 churches as symbols of 7 spiritual centers in the physical body? A. Correct, Rev 2, 1-3:22. Q. Are we correct in interpreting the 24 elders as the 24 cranial nerves of the head, especially related to the 5 senses? A. Correct, Rev 4, 4. Q is the frequent reference to the throne indicating the head in which are found the higher gland centers. A. Correct, Rev 4, 2-3, 5-6. Q. Are we correct in interpreting the 4 beasts as the 4 fundamental physical natures, desires, of man which must be overcome? A. Correct. In all of these, let this be understood, these are symbolized, they are as in representing the elemental forces as the body is the earth, is of the elements. Rev 12, 3, 13, 1, 13:11, 17:30. Q. Are we correct in interpreting the 144,000 who were sealed as being spiritualized cellular structure of the 12 major divisions of the body? A. Correct, Rev 7, 4. Q. What are the 4 angles that are bound in the river Euphrates? As has been indicated, the 4 influences that are as the air, the earth, the fire, the water, Rev 9:14. Q. Please explain the meaning of great star falls from heaven. A. The star signifies simply the coming of the influence from without to the influences from within, as signified by his star have we seen, Rev 8:10, 9, 1. The past lives of Jesus according to Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce, pronounced Cayce, was a simple Sunday school teacher who, over the span of his lifetime, 1877-1945, had more near-death experiences than anyone ever documented. Cayce learned at a young age that when he was hypnotized, he could leave his body and journey into the afterlife realms. His self-induced out-of-body experiences were identical to near-death experiences. Cayce made over 14,000 otherworldly journeys in his life, and the information he gained from these journeys has astounded people all over the world. The system of metaphysical thought which emerges from the Cayce material can be described as a Christianized version of the mystery religions of ancient Egypt, Chaldea, Persia, India, and Greece. It fits Christ into the mystical tradition of one God for all people, and places Christ in his proper place, at the apex of the philosophical structure, the capstone of the pyramid. Cayce was a fundamentalist Christian who was raised in strict 19th century Bible tradition. When he discovered that his subconscious information declared the ancient mystic religions to be true and acclaimed Jesus as their crowning glory, he suffered the greatest mental and emotional shock of his life. Cayce had only a 7th grade education and consciously knew nothing of what he said while in a deep trance-like state. He was only versed in the Bible and had no high school or college background of any kind. Up until his revelations, Cayce had never heard of the mystery religions. Yet the Cayce material agrees with everything about them that is known to be authentic. He spoke at length on Christian Gnosticism well before the Gnostic writings were discovered after his death. Cayce affirmed that Christian Gnosticism is the type of Christianity that was taught by Jesus. Much of the information from Cayce has solved some of the greatest mysteries of humanity, some of which were later validated after the discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the early Christian writings discovered in Egypt. Cayce's descriptions of the Essenes of Mount Carmel reveal the religious sect to be an ideal for others who would prepare the way for the second coming of Christ. Cayce's revelations of Jesus' so-called lost years as a youth studying in Egypt, Persia, and India suggest an important compatibility between the Eastern and Western religions. Cayce's Christology also makes the Christ soul not only an ideal and pattern toward which everyone should aspire, but a living presence to guide people toward at one met with God, the perfect divine human unity which Jesus attained. According to the Cayce material, Jesus and Adam were different incarnations of the same Christ soul. Eve and the Virgin Mary, Jesus' twin soul, were also different incarnations of the same soul. This karmic connection between Adam and Jesus explains why Jesus was able to pay the karmic debt by atoning for the sin of Adam. This Adam-Jesus connection can be seen in the following excerpt from the Cayce readings. Question: when did the knowledge come to Jesus that he was to be the Savior of the world? Cayce: when he fell in Eden. July 2067. According to Cayce, many other personalities from the Old Testament and history were also incarnations of Jesus. The Cayce material describes the entire Christian Bible as part of the story of Jesus' long struggle to attain Christhood and provide humanity a pattern to do the same. Here is a list of the incarnations of Jesus according to Cayce. The incarnations of Jesus Christ according to Edgar Cayce. Amelius was the first expression of divine mind, the Logos, the Christ soul before his incarnation into a physical body. Corresponding to Genesis 1, the entity that Cayce described, living in the lost civilization of Atlantis, who redirected the process of human evolution by creating a more appropriate physical form for the influx of souls to incarnate into rather than incarnating into the ape-like human form which souls had entangled themselves in. Adam was the first son of man and son of God, the Christ soul. After his incarnation into a physical body, corresponding to Genesis 2. Enoch was the antediluvian patriarch who journeyed to heaven to receive mysteries. Hermes, also known as Thoth, was the architect of the Great Pyramid and the sage who began the Hermetic tradition. Melchizedek was the mystical high priest and king of Salem, ancient Jerusalem. Joseph was the son of Jacob who became the prince of Egypt. Joshua was the warrior who led the Israelites into the promised land. Asaph was the music director and seer who served under David and Solomon. Jeshua was the high priest who helped organize the return from exile and the rebuilding of the temple, as recounted in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and who is claimed by Cayce to have compiled and translated the books of the Bible. Zend, also spelled Zen, Sen, or San, was the father of Zoroaster, who wrote the Zend-Avesta and founded the religion Zoroastrianism. Jesus was the man who attained complete at one met as the divine human unity known as the Christ. The Christ soul will reincarnate again to be the Messiah foretold by the Hebrew prophets in order to usher in the so-called throne of David, i.e., the kingdom of heaven, on earth. According to Cayce, the fall of man was an event recorded symbolically in Genesis where souls from heaven first descended to the earth plane to begin incarnating as humans. The first wave of souls to incarnate, known in the Bible as the sons of men, became entrapped in the earth plane. Accidentally, through their misuse of free will. These events gave rise to legends of the fall of the angels and to mythical beasts of the kind described in J.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. The second wave of incarnations, known in the Bible as the sons of God, consisted of those souls led by Amelius the Christ soul who voluntarily became entrapped in order to assist the first wave of trapped souls. They accomplished this by steering the process of physical evolution in a way that created more appropriate physical forms for these souls. Cayce places Amelius on Atlantis, but says that he did not physically incarnate until the human physical form had been created, at which time the Genesis accounts of Adam and Eve begin. Cayce sometimes used the word Adam to also refer to the entire group of souls which had accompanied the Christ soul into incarnating into the earth plane and who incarnated as the 5 races of humanity on 5 separate continents. Adam, as the Christ soul, joined his twin soul Eve in allowing himself to be seduced by materiality himself. This is symbolized by his acceptance of the forbidden fruit. The other sons of God followed his lead and incarnated, and as a result were moved to express their materiality by interbreeding with the daughters of men, Genesis 6, 1-2, who were the Homo sapiens that evolved from ape men according to Darwin's theory of evolution. According to the Cayce material and Christian Gnosticism, their banishment from the Garden of Eden was actually a great blessing because death and reincarnation are designed to draw our attention away from materiality and the flesh, and toward our true spiritual nature. Cayce also identified Melchizedek as an incarnation of the Jesus entity. Melchizedek was the king of Salem and priest of the Most High God who shares bread and wine with Abraham in Genesis 14:18-20. Melchizedek is also mentioned both in the Dead Sea Scrolls, IIQ Melch, and the Nag Hammadi Codices, NEC 9:1, where he appears as a cosmic angelic figure similar to the risen Christ. Hebrews 5:10 refers to Jesus a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. According to Cayce, Melchizedek wrote the Book of Job, which contains many unusual verses that Cayce would often quote from while in trance. For example, Cayce stated, "For, as the sons of God came together to reason, as recorded by Job, who recorded same the Son of Man. Melchizedek wrote Job." Cayce also identified the biblical personality named Enoch to be a Jesus entity incarnate. Enoch is described in several pseudepigraphal writings as well as some Kabbalistic writings. The modern Bible has a brief mention of Enoch. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. General 5:18-24. The books of Enoch describe the fall of the angels into materiality, the beginning of the incarnation of souls from heaven. It also describes Enoch's several heavenly journeys where it is revealed to him the future up until the time of the Messiah. Enoch is also taught traditional topics as angelology and the divine throne chariot. The Ethiopic Enoch introduces Enoch to a messianic figure referred to as the Son of Man. The Hebrew scripture known as Apocalypse of Enoch describes Enoch transfigured into an angel named Metatro. In the New Testament, Enoch is mentioned in Hebrews 11:5 and Jude 14-15, with the latter passage apparently quoting from the pseudepigraphal Enochian literature. The fact that the Bible itself quotes from the Book of Enoch is evidence that Cayce was correct about the book being a valid source for higher spiritual knowledge. Cayce also identified the biblical personality named Joseph, son of Jacob, as an incarnation of the Jesus entity soul. Accordingly, Joseph's escape from the pit was not only a literal event, but a symbolic anticipation of Jesus' resurrection. Cayce's identification of Joshua, the notorious genocidal leader of Israel in the Old Testament, as an incarnation of the Jesus entity is a little more difficult to believe. But Cayce viewed Joshua's claim to fame as being the scribe for Moses, who psychically dictated much of what is attributed to Moses. This interesting bit of information explains how Moses wrote about his own death. Another biblical personality named by Cayce to be a Jesus entity incarnate is the high priest named Jeshua, who helped organize the return from exile and the rebuilding of the temple, see Ezra and Nehemiah. According to Cayce, this Jeshua is the one who compiled and translated the books of the Bible. In essence, Cayce identifies all these biblical personalities to be psychic revelators. An interesting fact is that Joshua, Jeshua, and Jesus are really the same name. The name Jesus is a Latin version of the Aramaic name Jeshua or Yeshua, and Yeshua is Hebrew for Joshua or Yehoshua. Thus, Cayce has assigned the sole entity Jesus to be incarnations of the three biblical characters having the same name. Cayce also mentions that Jesus was an Essene who was registered by his Essene school under the name of Jeshua. Concerning the so-called second coming of Christ, which is really not the second, but many Cayce sometimes interpreted it to be an internal spiritual and psychic event within the individual. See Cayce on the Book of Revelation. On other occasions, Cayce interpreted it to be an actual return of Jesus Christ in physical form. When Cayce gave his prophecies about the massive geological changes predicted to being around 2000 AD, he stated that these will begin in those periods from 58 to 98, when these will be proclaimed as the periods when his light will be seen in the clouds, 3976 to 15. This reading from Cayce suggests that Jesus will appear in the sky and return to earth in bodily form. Cayce stated that Jesus will walk the earth again. As given, for 1,000 years he will walk and talk with men of every clime. Then, in groups, in masses, and then they shall reign of the first resurrection for 1,000 years, for this will be when the changes materially come. 364 to 8. Cayce gave the year of the entrance of the Messiah into this period minus 1998. 5748 to 5. He also mentions that no one knows the exact day of event because it cannot occur until his enemies and the earth are wholly in subjection to his will, his powers. 57:49-1. So this suggests that Jesus' return will not be a future incarnation in the flesh, since Jesus has already transcended the need to reincarnate. The incarnation as Jesus. 2 years after Cayce's death in 1945, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in Qumran. This remarkable archaeological discovery revealed a large amount of information about a religious sect around the time of Jesus referred to as the Essenes, and affirmed information provided by Cayce. The word Essene is never used in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but most scholars accept that the Qumran sect was either identical or closely related to the Essenes of the classical authors such as Josephus and Pliny. According to Cayce, Jesus was an Essene along with Mary and Joseph, who was affiliated with an Essene community based on Mount Carmel, which was a continuation of a school of the prophets begun by Elijah, Elisha, Samuel, and Melchizedek. Cayce described the Essenes as an pious religious community of men and women whose purpose was to prepare the way for the coming of the Messiah. Archaeology does not reveal the meaning behind the word Essene, but Cayce mentioned that it means expectancy. According to Josephus, the Essenes were known for divination, foretelling the future, which agrees with Cayce's descriptions of them spending their time recording experiences of the supernatural or out of the ordinary experiences, whether in dreams, visions, voices, or whatnot. January 1472. Cayce also mentioned that the Essenes were students of astrology, numerology, and reincarnation. The Dead Sea Scrolls describe the Essenes as an authoritarian, highly disciplined community that controlled every facet of members' lives. They had to give all their money and property over to the community after a year's probation. Their theology stressed a good versus evil duality. It also describes a conflict between a teacher of righteousness, a wicked priest, and the liar. They separated themselves from the outside world in an anticipated final war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. As for the Jesus connection to the Essenes, scholars believe the idea of Jesus being an Essene does not fit the personality and teachings of Jesus. Despite the many interesting similarities between Jesus and the Qumran community. For example, scholars believe the Essenes wouldn't have approved of Jesus' bending of the moral standards, such as associating himself with prostitutes and tax collectors. It is also believed that John the Baptist was an Essene because of the similarities between himself and the Essene community. According to Cayce, Jesus' mother Mary was chosen by the Essenes at the age of 4 to begin intensive spiritual training lasting 3 years in preparation for the conception of the Messiah. Her election as the mother of the Messiah occurs during a special ceremony in the temple at Mount Carmel, in which an angel leads her by the hand to the altar. Remarkably, this Cayce reading agrees with an apocryphal book entitled The Infancy Gospel of James, where Mary is presented to the Lord at the age of 3 when her father Joachim set her on the 3rd step of the altar, and the Lord God gave grace to her and she received food from the hand of an angel. 325. Cayce and the Infancy Gospel of James agree that Joseph was chosen to be Mary's husband by lot. They also agree that Joseph was much older than Mary. Cayce gives their ages at the time of their marriage as 36 and 16, respectively. Cayce and the Infancy Gospel of James agree that Jesus was born in a cave. Jesus and Eastern mysticism. According to Cayce, Jesus was 16 years old when his education about the ways of the ancient teachers began. First, he traveled to Egypt where, as an infant, Jesus was taken after his birth by his parents to flee Herod, as the Gospel of Matthew states. After spending time learning in Egypt, Jesus spent 3 years in India and finally a year in Persia. The idea that Jesus had spent his lost years wandering Asia did not originate with Cayce. Its first proponent seems to have been the Russian war correspondent Nicholas Otavich, 1858-1916, who described his travels in British India in a book entitled The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, published in 1894. According to his book, Otavich was told by the chief lama of a monastery that their library contained records of a visit by Jesus in ancient times. The chief lama finally relented to Otavich's requests to examine the records. From 2 large bound volumes, written in Tibetan, Otavich translated them through his interpreter as the life of Saint Issa, best of the sons of men. The text begins by summarizing the exodus of the Jews from Egypt, Israel's lapse into sin during the prophetic period, and the subsequent Roman occupation. But God has mercy on one poor couple, Mary and Joseph, whom he rewards by giving them a son, Issa, which is the questionaic name for Jesus. All is well until the boy turns 13 and the parents arrange a marriage for him. Issa left the parental house in secret, departed from Jerusalem, and with the merchants set out towards Sid, with the object of perfecting himself in the divine word and of studying the laws of the great Buddhas. 4:12-30. At 14, he encountered the erring worshippers of Jaya, reference to Jainism. Then he spent 6 years studying the Vedas and learned the art of exorcism and intercessory prayer. Issa rebuked Brahmin priests for upholding the caste system. Issa also would violate their customs by giving teachings to the lower castes. He is seen rejecting the authority of the Vedas and Puranas, denying the Trimurti and the incarnation of Brahma as Vishnu, Shiva, and other gods. It is written that Issa belittled idolatry and barely escaped India with his life. In Nepal, he grew proficient in Pali and spent 6 years studying Buddhist sutras. He condemned human and animal sacrifices, sun worship, the dualism of good and evil, and the Zoroastrian priesthood. The Zoroastrian priests seized him and abandoned him to the wilderness to be devoured by wild beasts, but he escapes anyway. Jesus the Christ. Cayce made a distinction between Jesus and the Christ. He said that Christhood is the goal which every human should strive for. Jesus was simply the first evolved human to attain it. Cayce referred to Jesus as our elder brother and the pattern for our own spiritual growth. The Bible states that Christ fulfilled the law and, according to Cayce, so can we. That is the entire purpose of Jesus' teaching. Cayce wrote, "The law of God made manifest, that he becomes the law by manifesting same before man, and thus as man, even as you becomes one with the Father." 11:58. 12. Because of Jesus' triumph over flesh and temptation, Jesus became the first of those that overcame death in the body, enabling him to so illuminate, to so revivify that body as to take it up again, even when those fluids of the body had been drained away by the nail holes in his hands and by the spear piercing his side. January 11:52. In essence, Cayce described the Christ soul as the impelling force and core of truth behind all religions that teach that God is one. I and my Father are one. Then they took up stones again to stone him. Jesus answered them, "Many good works have I shown you from my Father, for which of these do you stone me?" They answered him, saying, "For a good work we stone you not, but for blasphemy, and because that you, being a man, make yourself God." Jesus answered them, "Is it not written in your law, I said, you are gods?" John 10:30-3-4. Jesus quoting Psalm 82:6 to defend his teaching that God dwells within all human beings.